Shalom, good morning, brethren. We conclude Jeremiah today reading chapters 49 to 52, titled Judgments on the Gentile Nations, we heard, and a little fornication, because it is relevant as we talk about Babylon. So what we have in these last few chapters is God continues his judgment on the other nations, which we read were all Gentile nations. He started using Babylon against Judah, for this transgression of his law, and also against Egypt, because he told him not to go into Egypt because things he was going to do there. He's now going to move through some of the other nations and say what he's going to do about them. Just going to do some opening verses, because they're not salvational issues, and I'll leave you to read out chapters yourselves. But when it comes to the parts to do with salvation or fornication, I'll expand on those. Judgment on Ammon, chapters 49 verse 1. Concerning the Ammonites, thus saith Yahweh, have Israel no sons? Have he no heir? Why then doth their king inherit Gad, and his people dwell in his cities? Therefore, behold, the days come, saith Yahweh, that I will cause an alarm of war to be heard in Rabbah of the Ammonites, and it shall be a desolate heap, and her daughters shall be burnt with fire. Then shall Israel be heir unto them that were his, saith Yahweh. Verse 7, judgment on Edom. Concerning Edom, thus saith Yahweh, the God of hosts, is wisdom no more in Teman? Is counsel perished from the prudent? Is their wisdom vanished? Flee you, turn back, dwell deep, O inhabitants of Dibon. For I will bring the calamity of Esau upon him, the time that I will visit him. Verse 13. For I have sworn by myself, saith Yahweh, that Bozrah shall become a desolation, a reproach, a waste, and a curse, and all the cities thereof shall be perpetual waste. Verse 23, judgment on Damascus. Concerning Damascus, Hamath is confounded, and Arpad, for they have heard evil tidings. They are faint-hearted, there is sorrow on the sea, it cannot be quiet. Verse 26. Therefore her young men shall fall in her streets, and all the men of war shall be cut off in that day, saith Yahweh, God of hosts. And I will kindle a fire in the wall of Damascus, and it shall consume the palaces of Ben-Hadad. Verse 28, judgment on Kedar and Hazor. Concerning Kedar and concerning the kingdom of Hazor, which Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, shall smite, thus saith Yahweh, arise you, go up to Kedar, and spoil the men of the east. Verse 34, judgment on Elam. The word of Yahweh that came to Jeremiah the prophet against Elam in the beginning of the reign of Zedekiah the king of Judah, saying, thus saith Yahweh, God of hosts, behold, I will break the bow of Elam and the chief of their might. And upon Elam will I bring the four winds from the four quarters of heaven, and will scatter them towards all those winds, and there shall be no nation with the outcasts of Elam shall not come. For I will cause Elam to be dismayed before their enemies, and before them that seek their life, and I will bring evil upon them, even my fierce anger, saith Yahweh, and I will send the sword after them till I have consumed them. My comment, as I said, God uses Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, to smite the Gentile nations. Later in Daniel, we shall see he uses the Medes and Persians to smite Babylon. Gentile means unholy, heathen, without God, either as a nation or an individual. The definition does not change in the New Testament, so one cannot be a Gentile believer in its true sense. Citizen of an unholy, ungodly, heathen nation. As an obedient believer, one becomes grafted into the kingdom of God, his nation of Israel, becoming a citizen of his holy kingdom through his son, Yeshua, part of the peculiar people that have and live by his laws. 1 Timothy chapters 1 verse 9, knowing this, that the law is not made for a righteous man, but for the lawless and disobedient, for the ungodly, and for sinners, for unholy and profane, for murderers of fathers and murderers of mothers, for manslayers, for whoremongers, for them that defile themselves with mankind, for men stealers, for lies, for perjured persons, and if there be any other thing that is contrary to sound doctrine. That's the purpose of the law. Ephesians 2:11. Wherefore remember that you, being in times past Gentiles in the flesh, who are called uncircumcision by that which is called circumcision in the flesh, made by hands, that at that time you were without Christ, being aliens from the commonwealth of Israel, and strangers from the covenant of promise, having no hope and without God in the world. But now in Christ, or the Messiah, you who sometimes were far off are made near by the blood of Yeshua. Judgment on Babylon, chapter 50, verse 1. The word of Yahweh spoke against Babylon and against the land of the Chaldeans by Jeremiah the prophet. Declare you among the nations, and publish and set up a standard. Publish and conceal not. Say, Babylon is taken. Bel is confounded. Merodah is broken in pieces. Her idols are confounded. Her images are broken in pieces. For out of the north there cometh up a nation against her, which shall make her land desolate, and none shall dwell therein. They shall remove, they shall depart, both man and beast. In those days, in that time, saith Yahweh, the children of Israel shall come, they and the children of Judah, together, going and weeping, they shall go and seek Yahweh their God. They shall ask the way to Zion, with their faces thitherward, saying, Come, and let us join ourselves to Yahweh in a perpetual covenant that shall not be forgotten. My people have been lost as sheep. Their shepherds have caused them to go astray. They have turned them away on the mountains. They have gone from a mountain to hill. They have forgotten their resting place. All that found them have devoured them, and their adversaries said, We offend not, because they have sinned against Yahweh. The habitation of justice, even Yahweh, the hope of their fathers. Verse 13. Because of the wrath of Yahweh it shall not be inhabited, but it shall be wholly desolate. Every one that goeth by Babylon shall be astonished, and hiss at all her plagues. Put yourselves in an array against Babylon, round about. All you that bend the bow, shoot at her, spare no arrows, for she hath sinned against Yahweh. Israel is a scattered sheep. The lions have driven him away. First the kingdom of Assyria have devoured him, and last this Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, have broken his bones. Therefore thus saith Yahweh, the God of hosts, the God of Israel, Behold, I will punish the king of Babylon and his land as I have punished the king of Assyria. And I will bring Israel again to his habitation, and he shall feed on Carmel and Bashan, and his soul shall be satisfied upon the Mount Ephraim and Gilead. Verse 20, listen. In those days, and in that time, saith Yahweh, the iniquity of Israel shall be sought for, and there shall be none. And the sins of Judah, and they shall not be found, for I will pardon them whom I reserve. Verse 33. Thus saith Yahweh, God of hosts, the children of Israel and the children of Judah were oppressed together, and all that took them captive held them fast. They refused to let them go. The Redeemer is strong. Yahweh, the God of hosts, is his name. He shall thoroughly plead their cause, that he may give rest to the land and disquiet the habitations of Babylon. Some comments. Bel, of verse 2 and 51, verse 44, is the name of one of Babylon's false gods. See also Isaiah chapter 46 verse 1. That is why Daniel's name was changed by the king of Babylon in Daniel chapter 1 verse 7 to Belshazzar, which means Bel will protect. Daniel chapter 4 verse 8 reads, But at last Daniel came in before me, whose name was Belshazzar, according to the name of my God, and in whom is the spirit of the holy gods. And before him I told a dream, saying, O Belshazzar, master of the magicians, because I know that the spirit of the holy gods is in thee. So that's why his name was changed from God's names to obeying God's name. In Daniel 11, we read of kings from the north and kings from the south of Jerusalem. Jerusalem was in the middle of those two kingdoms, and so became embroiled in the war between them. Because of verse 7, they sinned against Yahweh, their God, which means breaking his laws and his covenant to keep his laws. In 50 verse 14, Babylon also had a lifestyle against Yahweh, God, in that they also worshipped false gods. The common message is Israel or Gentile, nation or individual, all should fear and obey God and his laws. In 50 verse 20, we are then told, in the future, God will gather his scattered lost sheep, Israel, and rejoin them to Judah. That was the purpose of the Messiah coming for the lost sheep of Israel, as it says in Matthew 10 verse 6. But go rather to the lost sheep of Israel, lost sheep of the house of Israel, including their servants and so on. Matthew 15:24, but he answered and said, I am not sent but to the lost sheep of the house of Israel, not to the Hebrews, but to the whole house of the 12 tribes of Israel. So when we remember the 12 households went into Egypt with Jacob, included all his servants, etc. Chapter 51, the utter destruction of Babylon, verse 1, reading. Thus saith Yahweh, behold, I will raise up against Babylon and against them that dwell in the midst of them that rise up against me a destroying wind. Verse 7. Babylon hath been a golden cup in Yahweh's hand. Listen to this verse, please. I'll read it again. 51 verse 7. Babylon hath been a golden cup in Yahweh's hand that made all the earth drunken. The nations have drunken of her wine, therefore the nations are mad. Babylon is suddenly fallen and destroyed. Howl for her, take balm for her pain, if so she may be healed. We would have healed Babylon, but she is not healed. Forsake her, and let us go everyone into his own country, for her judgment reacheth up to heaven, and is lifted up even to the skies. Yahweh hath brought forth our righteousness. Come and let us declare in Zion the work of Yahweh our God. Make bright the arrows, gather the shields. Yahweh hath raised up the spirit of the kings of the Medes, for his device is against Babylon, to destroy it, because it is the vengeance of Yahweh, the vengeance of his temple. Set up the standard upon the walls of Babylon, make the watch strong, set up the watchmen, prepare the ambushes, for Yahweh hath both devised and done that which he spake against the inhabitants of Babylon. Verse 44. And I will punish Bel in Babylon, and I will bring forth out of his mouth that which he hath swallowed up, and the nations shall not flow together any more unto him. Yea, the wall of Babylon shall fall. Verse 59. The word which Jeremiah the prophet commanded Seraiah, the son of Neriah, the son of Maaseiah, when he went with Zedekiah, the king of Judah, into Babylon in the 4th year of his reign. And this Seraiah was a quiet prince. So Jeremiah wrote in a book all the evil that should come upon Babylon, even all these words that are written against Babylon. And Jeremiah said to Seraiah, when thou comest to Babylon, and shalt see and shalt read all these words, then shalt thou say, Yahweh, thou hast spoken against this place, to cut it off, that none shall remain in it, neither man nor beast, but that it shall be desolate forever. And it shall be, when thou hast made an end of reading this book, that thou shalt bind a stone to it, and cast it into the midst of Euphrates, which is a river. And thou shalt say, thus shall Babylon sink, and shall not rise from the evil that I will bring upon her, and there shall be weary. Thus far are the words of Jeremiah. Okay, fornication. In chapters 51 verse 7 above, we read of Babylon influencing other nations to follow their false gods. Using the King James's version, not so much the New King James or other King James version, because they're starting to change them, we see fornication and Babylon mentioned in Revelations. These verses confirm fornication is not to do with sex between man and woman, but false god worship. The verses must be understood in the context of what we are told of Babylon. Revelations 14 verse 8. By the way, there's one that says come out of her, means come out of Babylon, come out of these false god worship, just like because God's going to kill Babylon or destroy it, as we read about. Okay, Revelations 14 verse 8. And there followed another angel saying, Babylon is fallen, that great city, because she made all nations drink of the wine of the wrath of her fornication. Revelation 17 verse 2. With whom the kings of the earth have committed fornication, and the inhabitants of the earth have been made drunk with the wine of her fornication. 17 verse 4. And a woman was arrayed in purple and scarlet colour, and decked with gold and precious stones and pearls, having a golden cup in her hand, full of abomination and filthiness of her fornication. Revelations 18:3. For all the nations have drunk of the wine of the wrath of her fornication, and the kings of the earth have committed fornication with her, and the merchants of the earth are waxed rich through the abundance of her delicacies. Again, talking about Babylon. Revelations 18:9. And the kings of the earth who have committed fornication have lived deliciously with her, shall bewail her and lament for her when they shall see the smoke of her burning. Revelations 19:2. For true and righteous are his judgments, for he hath judged the great whore, which did corrupt the earth with her fornication, and have avenged the blood of his servants at her hand. So, after reading those verses, thus we do not need a man's concordance to understand what fornication means when God's scriptures has made it clear.
We have seen what God said about Babylon in Jeremiah and what he did to them, and we know how God feels about false god worship, which is a reason he scattered firstly Israel by the Syrians and now the tribe of Judah by Babylon. Where people get confused with the meaning of fornication is firstly because Christianity commonly teaches its error, which they inherited from the Catholic Church or other denominations. They use Matthew chapter 5 verse 32 and 19 verse 9, where Yeshua is asked, can a husband put away his wife for any reason? So clearly the question put to Yeshua was in the context of married people, not single people. And then we will see that Yeshua goes on to say that except for the cause of fornication, if a man puts a wife away, he causeth her to commit adultery. Adultery, we know, is a sexual act, which we will call immoral act. And if you use the common Christian understanding that fornication is also a sexual act, the sentence would read, Yeshua saying that putting the wife away, except for her sexual act, will cause her to commit adultery, which is a sexual act. The husband cannot cause her to do something, commit the immoral sexual act, which is the reason he put her away in the first place. So it is nonsense to say it is a sexual act. Secondly, Yeshua said anyone who marries her would be committing adultery, because technically she'd be still married, her husband would still be alive. So if you take the common Christian understanding that a husband can put away his wife for immoral sexual activity, that means this wife, or any wife, whenever she wants a divorce from her husband, just has to have immoral sex with her new lover and tell the husband about it, and according to common Christian understanding, the husband can give her a bill of divorcement, and she can then go and be with her new lover. And when she gets fed up of him, she just does the same again. Have sexual sex with the next person, tell the husband, and ask the husband for a bill of divorcement. So it is wrong in many ways to see that fornication is to do with men and women, and especially to do with single people, when this question and answer was in the context of married people. Fornication is, as we saw, has an association with false God worship. The number one sin against God, the first and second commandments, thou shalt know God before me, thou shalt bow down before the God, Exodus chapters 20 verse 3 and so on. So Yeshua is saying that except she commits the number one sin in God's eyes, any other reason to put her away will be a false reason. She will then go on to be with another man and technically be committing adultery, him and whoever marries her, because she's technically still married because the husband is still alive. However, if she has a false god, such as Solomon did with his 1,000 wives or concubines, that is a reason to put her away. If you read Deuteronomy chapter 13, it also talks about people who make you go after a false god, what is to happen to them. So the only reason that Yeshua is saying you can put your wife away is if she worships a false god. Because God would rather you put her away than she do to you what Solomon's wives did to him, make his heart go away from God. So let's get Matthew 5:32 and 19:9 in the right context of false God worship, nothing to do with men and women having sex. God is more concerned about your false God worship than your immoral sexual activities. I'm not saying he's not concerned, but that is not what the question is about. Okay, let's continue.
Right, returning to comments on Jeremiah. In Daniel chapters 5 verse 28 and 9 verse 1, we read of the Medes conquering and taking over from Babylon Empire, i.e. together with the Persians, who were the second kingdom of Daniel chapters 2 verse 32 and verse 39, which is the breast and the arms of silver. And just as we read above, God said he will bring the Medes against Babylon. Okay, chapter 52 of the fall of Jerusalem recounted. This is a summary. Read the whole chapter for yourself. 52 verse 1. Zedekiah was 21 years old when he began to reign, and he reigned 11 years in Jerusalem, and his mother's name was Hamutal, the daughter of Jeremiah of Libnah. And he did that which was evil in the eyes of Yahweh, according to all that Jehoiakim had done. For through the anger of Yahweh it came to pass in Jerusalem and Judah, till he had cast them out from his presence, that Zedekiah rebelled against the king of Babylon. Verse 12, the temple burned. Now in the 50th month, in the 10th day of the month, in the 5th, not 50th. Now in the 5th month, in the 10th day of the month, which was the 19th year of Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came Nebuzaradan, captain of the guard, which served the king of Babylon, into Jerusalem, and burned the house of Yahweh, and the king's house, and all the houses of Jerusalem, and all the houses of the great men burned he with fire. Verse 24, the people exiled to Babylon. And the captain of the guard took Shariah, Shariah, the chief priest, and Zephaniah, the second priest, and the 3 keepers of the door. He took also out of the city an eunuch, which had the charge of the men of war, and 7 men of them that were near the king's person, which were found in the city, and the principal scribe of the host, which mustered the people of the land, and 60 men of the people of the land that were found in the midst of the city. So Nebuzaradan, the captain of the guard, took them and brought them to the king of Babylon into Riblah. And then it goes on to say in what year he took how many people. I leave it to you to see if he also took the Ark of the Covenant at that time and what happened to it. Shalom, until tomorrow, God willing.
Now, before I leave you, I'll just give you a quick, reminder of the Jeremiah. Jeremiah is dealing with the sin of Judah, the national sin of Judah. Israel, the 10 tribes who settled on one side of the river Jordan when they came to the Promised Land, already sinned and they were scattered by the Syrians. Judah, the 2 tribes, or 2.5 tribes, didn't do as bad, and God only scattered them or put them in Babylon for 70 years. But it's always God's intention to reunite them back to 12 tribes again, under one king, one Messiah, his son, Yeshua. And it's for that reason that Daniel understood the prophecy of Jeremiah. Ezra and Nehemiah then took some of the people of Judah back to Jerusalem. So by the time Yeshua was born, Judah was already back in Jerusalem when the empire changed and the Romans were in charge, but Israel was still lost. So Yeshua died and showed them that he was a Messiah. The tribe of Judah understood that because they were alive to be told that by the apostles and witnessed it themselves. The other tribes did not know that. They're still scattered. So Paul and Barnabas were sent by God, separated by God, he says, to tell them about their Messiah. When they came to, in Acts 2, from the day of Pentecost, they were told then, 3,000 of them got baptized. Later they came and another 4,000 got baptized. And then Paul and Barnabas went around all the synagogues in the Gentile nations, teaching the other lost people of Israel, the 10 tribes, about their Messiah and about their history. You cannot imagine Paul going talking to common Gentiles about a system that they do not know of, Abraham, the law of God, and so on. He was able to be understood and believed because he went to Jews who lived in Gentile nations, but they knew a little bit about their history and about Abraham. So he was able to convince them from their own scriptures what he's saying about the Messiah. The same way Stephen tried to convince him and he didn't believe, but now Paul is now doing the same thing that Stephen did, trying to convince the other people who don't know about Messiah that he is indeed the promised Messiah, and he did this from the scriptures. So that eventually, hopefully, as Romans 11 says, all Israel, 12 tribes, will be saved. So the Bible, the New Testament, is always only about this Israel group. From the history of them, through Abraham, very quickly in Genesis, they then become the nation of Israel in Exodus, and then thereafter the Bible is about these 12 tribes. 10 disobeyed and got scattered, Israel. 2 disobeyed and got into Babylon, and then the New Testament is about the message of the new Messiah, their promised Messiah, who God promised through Moses to send someone like him to reunite them under the one kingdom. It is nothing to do about Christians, even though they were called Christians in Acts chapter 10, I believe, or thereabouts. What you're called is not what you are. So, and even to the book of Revelations, we see always it ends up with the nation of Israel and 144,000 and so forth. Now that does not mean you have to be Hebrew, because they went into Egypt with their households. So you come under the household of one of the 12 tribes once you want to be grafted in. I hope that is clearer as we go through our rest of our studies. Bear this in mind, and it should make a bit more sense what we study. Shalom.